Hello, and thank you for listening. My name is Joe, and I'm a sexual anorexic, love and fantasy addict. I hope you hear something in my story that relates to you. If not, there are many of other recordings you can listen to. I am a white, cisgender, heterosexual male, and that's where my story comes from, and I acknowledge that white privilege and male privilege is a part of my story. So yeah, I guess I'll get started here. I have 30 minutes. We'll see how long I go. So I've been in program for 3 years, and I've been abstaining from my bottom line behavior, which is a behavior that is an addictive pattern of self-destructive behavior that brought me into this room of a sexual or romantic nature. My bottom line is no pornography. I identify as a pornography addict as well. And it's hard to say where it all started. I know that this behavior that I'm aware of, the sexual behavior, started when I was probably 15 or so. But getting attention and validation and approval from women has always been a part of my story ever since I can remember. There was something from my childhood I did not get, probably emotional attention. My emotional needs were not met. My parents did the best they could. Both of them have a heavy history of trauma. On my mom's side, there was a lot of sexual, verbal, and physical abuse. And I've heard stories of sexual abuse in my family. So it may very well be that in my past there was some sexual trauma. I just was too young to remember it. But I have emotional sensations that go back to that time. So the first thing that happened to me, and the first way that addiction as a whole represented itself in my life, is I developed an eating disorder, which is not what this program is about. But in that eating disorder, I binged a lot of food, and I gained a lot of weight, and I get body dysmorphia. And that tied into my sexual anorexia, because I felt I wasn't sexually attractive, and I was unlovable. And the weight was my armor that kept me from being emotionally or physically intimate with anyone. Weight was a problem my whole life. When I turned 15, I was introduced to pornography through a magazine that my friend had gotten from his father's stash. That seems to always be inherited from man to man. I remember looking at magazines and printed media at first. Some of it was printed from the computer, I think. And later on, when I just discovered internet pornography, and I don't exactly remember how or when I discovered it, but I for many years I would look at pornography before I was ever sexual to it. I did not start being sexual with myself until a very old age, 21, 22. I was always a late bloomer in these areas. Before that, when I was 16, I got into a relationship. Interestingly, after losing a lot of weight, after going on a very unhealthy diet, again, I equated weight to attractiveness. So the thinner I was, the more attractive I was. Because I got a girlfriend when I was thin, I set up this belief in my mind that I had to be thin in order to be attractive or to be in a relationship. It was a very toxic relationship. I was around, in high school, and it didn't start well, didn't end well. She was abusive, I was negligent, and just didn't know what to do, and it was pretty awful. And I attracted people to me that validated in an untrue way, but like that told me what I wanted to hear about myself, which was that I was unlovable, that I was not sexually attractive. She didn't want to have sex with me at first. But I have to acknowledge that she did actually make an offer. She did proposition me, and I hung up the phone. I didn't remember that until I came into this program. It was bad all around. And then I was locked into, or locked myself into, depending on how you look at it, 16 years of anorexia. So I did not have any romantic or sexual interaction with anyone of any kind. No one-night stands, no flings, no relationships for 16 years. And because I did not actually have sex with my girlfriend in high school, I actually was, and to this day am, a virgin. And I'm in my mid-30s now because of this disease. It's an extreme form of anorexia, but it's not that common in this program, but we do have members like this. And, you know, I'm learning how to be compassionate with myself over that. So the pornography use continued. And then when I was 21 and 22, I discovered masturbation, which I will refer to as M from now on, so as not to be too triggering. M was my constant companion. It became a habitual thing. And it was an invisible disease because I was looking at pornography and using M behind closed and locked doors. So for the most part, nobody knew that I was doing that. And I mean, well, nobody knew I was doing that. Nobody did. You know, it's like, oh, well, all the boys are doing it. You know, all the boys are doing it. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. It's normal and natural. And, you know, M may be normal and natural for most men, but, you know, I'm a sex and love addict. So it has a unhealthy, addictive relationship with me. So time went on, and then my weight went up, and I went into another program, which I won't talk about, but my weight started, before my weight started to come off in that program, I went through a raw period, and compulsive M started showing up. And it's instead of just being in my private residence behind a locked door, it started happening in bathroom stalls, and then it graduated to in my car. I pulled over to some quiet areas of some suburban areas and did it there. One time I was driving on the freeway. I mean, this is crazy behavior. This is insane behavior. And I didn't really have the understanding at the time to recognize how insane that behavior was, but I figured it was a result of the raw period I was going through in this new program, my first 12-step. And then that behavior stopped. Compulsive M completely disappeared from my life for 4 years. So those 4 years went by. I was still doing M and looking at pornography behind closed locked doors, but that's where it stayed. Didn't venture out again anywhere else. And I lost weight, and I developed spirituality, and I developed a much stronger emotional connection to myself, and started to understand some things about myself and gain that spiritual recovery that we yearn for, even when we don't know what spiritual recovery is. And I kept moving the goalposts on myself. Dating was always in the future, and my friends kept asking me, as friends would, like, when are you going to start dating? You know, when are you going to date? And someone even tried to set me up with someone once, and I shut that down very quickly. And there was always an excuse. Oh, you know, well, I'm not dating right now. I've decided not to date right now. Or, yeah, in a few months maybe I'll, you know. And the truth was, deep down inside, I was so terrified of the prospect of that. My anorexia was so strong that I just couldn't break myself out of it. I was chained up. I was in a prison. And then we come all the way up to 2017, and I've lost some weight. I'm feeling a little more confident. And I had moved out the year before, finally moved out on my own. And for the first time I was on my own. And one of the gateposts, I had these, goalposts, I kept changing. One of them was, well, when I move out on my own, I'll date. Because I can't date while I'm living in my parents' house, even though I have friends who dated and married their spouse while living at their parents' houses. You know, and there are people of all different body types and all different weights in relationships. I mean, it just, these were flimsy excuses, and I probably knew that. The real reason I didn't want to date is because of my anorexia. I was so terrified of emotional intimacy, and I put out that energy. People just, I think they learned to stay away from me. I was so good at avoiding and hiding and just disappearing. I was the king of the Irish goodbye at a party. I was so socially anorexic as well, and emotionally. I just kind of faded in the background and wore ill-fitting clothes, um, dirty or stained or just old and faded, and just you know, unkempt hair, and I just didn't want to be seen. My hair was so long it was easy, it almost hid my face, which is probably subconsciously why I did let that happen. Um, so this was my whole life was so small because of this disease. Um, and there was this woman. Now, isn't there always someone we're interested in that I wanted to ask out, and I was too nervous to do it, and I a couple of times made the plan to do it, and then lost my nerve, and then uh, it was a Friday night, and I was going to see a movie with my friends, and right before the movie, I went to a meeting. And then I left the meeting after it ended, and I was driving. I was going to start driving to the movie, which is in the same city, so it was right around the corner. And out of nowhere, I had the uncontrollable urge to do M, and I didn't have time to drive all the way back south home, where I lived about 10 miles south, do it, and then drive all the way back up. I'd missed the movie, and I could not stop myself from doing it. It was so overwhelmingly powerful. And I pulled over to the darkest street I could find, and through some shred of sanity, I covered the windows. And of course, I turned on some pornography on my phone, and then did it. And it was really a horrific experience, looking back on it. And like a good addict, I forgot about it. I forgot completely about it the next day. And ironically, look back on that movie that I watched with my friends with great joy, because it was a great movie and we had a great time afterward. And that's how compartmentalized I was with it. And it took a few months for me to kind of kind of really, for it to surface back up again. And I went to an event in my other program, a big event, and I ran into someone after at the event who was in my original program that the event was for, and then was in S.L.A.A. And for some reason, even though I'd heard him talk about the program a couple times, it clicked with me at this point. And I listened to it. We talked for 2 hours, and I realized I needed to be in this program. And I went to a meeting the next day. For those of you in LA, it's the 10 a.m. Saturday meeting. And I realized I was a sexual anorexic, and a sex and love addict, for general terminology's sake. I called up my sponsor and said, sponsor me in this program. And he said, okay. He had been telling me to go for a couple of years, and I was like, yeah, okay, sure. Because I didn't want to go to a second program. I didn't want to do anything I could to avoid a second program. If you told me that if I could saw off my left leg and like hop around on one leg, that I wouldn't have to go to another 12-step program, at that point I would have taken you up on that offer. I mean, I just didn't want to admit I was powerless in another area of my life. But, looking back on it now, thank God I did. Because what I was doing was illegal. And it really could have, if anyone had seen me, and I pray to God no one did, as far as I know, no one had, I mean, that really could have been horrible. I could have had to register as a sex offender. I mean, the horrific nature of that. I mean, to just think about that. Because of this disease. And I'm so glad that no one saw me. I really am. So I went into program and started working the steps and went through withdrawal, which was difficult. Withdrawal really at its heart is a form of grief. You're grieving all the pain that you held down through your behaviors. When we act out as addicts, we're pushing away feelings. And they just kind of get stored somewhere. And I know that because when I went through withdrawal, they all came back up, all these old feelings. And they weren't necessarily attached to thoughts or memories. Some of them were. But a lot of it's just old feelings coming up. And you just feel like you're just a giant sack of sadness and rage and terror and depression. And you just feel like it's never going to end. I physically felt colder. I felt like I felt like the sun had gone away for a while. It was just all that grief coming up was just kind of blocked out happiness for me in a big way. And I did have suicidal thoughts, which I thought was a huge problem. Normally, when you hear that, especially from a professional, they tell you call your therapist or get to it's a psychiatric emergency. And I called fellows and told them about it, and they said, yeah, I had that too. You're right where you need to be. It's like only in this program is suicidal ideation a normal symptom of this disease. And so many things came up, so many feelings. And I realized later that the reason I had acted out that night in the car before that movie is because the girl that I wanted to ask out was at that meeting. And seeing her must have triggered an urge to ask her out, and I must have stuffed it down without realizing it. And that anorexic act of strangling normal romantic or sexual desires had reached a breaking point, and it just caused me to just lose control. Now, when I have the urge to ask someone out, I do it. Because what I realized, that fear started to melt away. I realized that asking someone out is a normal, natural part of life. And as long as it's an appropriate situation, it's perfectly okay to do that. Because the worst thing that can happen is the person can go, no. And you go, okay. And you can move on with your life. But taking that action is important. Again, if it's in an appropriate situation, you're not asking people out at funerals or or that sort of thing. So, although as an addict, I'm sure that someone's done that. We've done all kinds of things. So I continued in my program, and all I could think about was how terrified I was at the prospect of dating. Because to me, dating was like a monster. I mean, it's hard to explain if you don't have this disease, but think of something you're terrified of, whether it's rational or irrational. It's something you're absolutely terrified of. Something that, if you were in a football field, on the field, at one end of the field, and that thing that you're terrified was at the other end of that field, at the very extreme end, you would still go running and screaming from the field. I mean, I was just so much fear. And I think that goes back to whatever happened in my childhood. And that fear very slowly melted away as I learned what dating really was. And I realized that my concepts of dating and relationships were based entirely on my screwed up attitudes about sex and love, pornography, and bad romantic comedies. I mean, I really didn't know what a relationship was. It was the best I had were second and third hand reports from friends. And I just had no idea. And I had never dated before. My girlfriend in high school, we never dated. We jumped into a relationship immediately. Saw each other a couple times at school. She came to my birthday, and then we broke up a month later. I mean, we never went on a date. I never took her out anywhere. I mean, I didn't have a car, but I mean, people know how to do these things. Other people do. I was just completely inept. So I kept going through the program. I kept working the steps. I kept listening to people. I went into no contact. The woman I mentioned I wanted to ask out, I invited her to Disneyland with me, and we were going to go to Disneyland. I was going to invite these other two people I knew who had a season pass. And I told my sponsor about it. He said, wait a minute, so you're inviting two friends who are married, they're husband and wife. You're inviting them, and then you're going with this woman with her. I said, yeah. He said, that's a double date. I said, no, it's not. No, it's not. We're friends. He said, you are going out with a married couple. That's a date. And I could not admit that deep down, subconsciously, that was what I wanted. I fought with my sponsor through angry texts, and finally I realized he was right. And I went into no contact that day, and I called her and I said, hey, I just want to let you know I talked to my sponsor. I'm going into no contact with women. And no contact, as I understand it, is usually an indefinite process. It just depends on if you get a sponsor, on how you're sponsored. But mine was indefinite, and it ended up lasting 4 months. And that first week, man, that first 2 weeks, maybe the first 3 weeks, I was like a like a dog, just on the, bouncing off the walls, just high on sugar or something. I was just, I was like, I can't do this. How am I going to do this? And then after a few weeks, an incredible sense of calm overtook me. And I realized that my entire life strategy was based around trying to get attention from women and trying to get validation from women, approval from women. And maybe, God help me if I was lucky, some sort of romantic flirting or interest, which I would then immediately run away from. But I just wanted to get a little taste of it. And there's something in the literature about we crave intimacy even though we're terrified of it. And it's just like, that's what we do. And all of that was gone. That static in my head, that nervous static of constantly being around women that I was terrified of. And I realized I had a phobia of women because of my childhood. My mother was very emotionally abusive. She was an addict. She was a rager. She tore into me and my dad constantly over very small things. Probably because as an addict, she could not tolerate her own discomfort and had to control everything and had to fix everything. My dad was the meekest man you've ever met and just kind of sat there and quietly took all that over the years. And my sponsor said to me once, he said, Joe, if you saw your mother tearing into your father over your whole childhood, how would that color your opinion of men? And he was right. I had no deep, platonic, intimate relationships with men. I had some really good male friends that I had developed throughout, or our relationship had developed throughout high school and college. But it wasn't until I hit that program that I realized on my side of it, from me to them, my energy, the love that I had for them, like it was very anorexic and anemic. I had a moment. I woke up one day in program, a year or two, I think it was a year in, maybe 6 months in. It's like, all of my relationships are empty. Like I had this kind of sobering, fearful moment. All my relationships are empty because I was so afraid to be intimate that I just kind of lived a shadow life. Shadows of connections with friends and family. And that was also from my childhood circumstances. Being detached was very helpful in my childhood. Being able to just zone out at a moment's notice. And I'm sure one or two fights my parents had, I was, on the computer with the pornography and so on. I'm sure that came up. I mean, that's where that comes from. And I wasn't allowed to feel my feelings. As a man, I wasn't. My dad, the meekest person you've ever met, calmest guy, rarely got really angry. He got fearful a lot. He was terrified he had a lot of financial insecurity and would get very worked up, almost into fits over that. But he didn't get angry that often. And yet, even the meekest man you've ever met, when I would cry as a child, he would yell at me to stop crying. Yell at me. And of course, yelling was, for my mother, was very common. And I still have trouble with loud noises and, started stuff. I mean, that's still there. And so that really was disheartening. And that's not a unique story, And I've been learning how to break out of that man box, how to let myself feel my feelings and be vulnerable, and and break out of that toxic masculinity that all of us are branded with as boys, and trained and conditioned by society. So I've been learning to free myself from that. I did not like men, and I had my fair share of bad experiences with men, as everyone has, as I grew up, boys and men. And, I learned in this program how to develop intimacy with other men. And what I realized is that, and my sponsor helped me understand, it's like when you're having trouble, if you're in a relationship and you're having trouble with something emotionally, and as addicts and as survivors of trauma in this program, we don't deal very well with emotional issues and with problems. We're emotionally wounded, and so we need extra help, and that's okay. We're never going to be normal, but we have this program that helps keeps us well. So I can reach out to, when I'm upset, I can reach out to fellows first. I can journal about it, can go to a meeting, talk to my sponsor, read some literature, process what I'm going through, and then talk to my partner about it. Because then I'm not dumping my emotions on her, and I'm not expecting her to be my emotional servant. It says in our literature very clearly, we take care of our own emotional needs before involving ourselves with others. And you can look at that in two different ways. At least I did. One is the process of the steps to get to a point where we're ready to start sober dating. Sober dating is not the goal of the program. It's not the point of the program. But it is a healthy byproduct of our emotional well-being. We have healthy emotional well-being. And so what I realized is, when I get to a point where I'm emotionally ready to start dating, I know how to take care of my own emotional needs at that point. And I've talked to people I'm dating about that, now that I'm sober dating. I take care of my own emotional needs first. But you see, in my anorexia, because I'm not perfect, because I need a lot of guidance and a lot of help from my fellas, from my men in program, and I go through the dating process, I can turn that around on myself. My disease can get involved in that, and I can become anorexic, and I can completely emotionally close off from my date and think that I'm being emotionally self-sufficient. But that's not vulnerability, and vulnerability breeds intimacy, which breeds relationships. So I'm working on that. But I developed a lot of really great relationships with men in program. And learned to develop those. And now I can have friendships in S.L.A.A. with women, which is something I couldn't have before. They have to have a little bit of structure to them. Usually they're business related. And there's certain things I don't do. If I'm in a group of men and women, and that group dwindles down till it's just me and a woman, then at that point it's my time to leave, because fantasy and all that can creep in, and so I need to step out, because then my intentions are no longer to be of service or to socialize or make a connection. Then they can become a need for attention, depending on what it is. If it's a social event, definitely I have to step away. I don't look at pornography anymore. I check my intention every time I want to have contact with a woman, whether business or personal or whatever, and say, am I doing this to be of service, or am I doing this to get something? Because if I'm going into a situation, any situation, with the goal to get something, I'm in trouble. And so I realized that as an anorexic, like the biggest mistake that I made as an anorexic was that by not being willing to be in a relationship, I could not be of romantic and sexual service to someone in a relationship, and not giving of myself in that way. And now that I've been sober dating the last few weeks, I get to do that. So as my time draws to a close, I will say thank you for listening. This program has given me an emotional and spiritual life I never knew I could have. It's reached deep into my issues and helped me come to terms with a lot of things. For the first time in my life, I'm dating and I'm learning it. And, I feel like a third grader in a college level calculus class. I definitely feel a lot of insecurity and not enoughness, but I'm working on that. And I'm just so grateful that you're all listening to my recording. I hope you heard some of your story and mine. I can tell you that I have a peace and a serenity and a love for myself that is unbounded, and that I get to be fulfilled by that, and then I get to export fulfillment to others. And that's the greatest joy I can be. And anytime I'm feeling low, a surefire way to build myself back up is to be of service to someone else, to help someone else. So I just need to get out of my head. Usually that's what it's about. And now that I have a sponsee, I can be of service in a different way, which during this global pandemic is really valuable to my recovery and his. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you all for listening. It's an honor to be part of something that I wanted when I came into program. And maybe I'll see you at a meeting. Goodbye.